Chris, brother, long time no see. How are you, my friend?
I'm good, man. Excited to be spending time with you.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was looking back and you were episode number one of the Income Flip podcast. And man, we're really coming full circle on this conversation. And for those that don't know, Chris, good friend of mine, mentor, he ran uh, a community, like a men's group community of real estate entrepreneurs, and crushed it, right? Like absolutely crushed it. Loved that community. And we're kind of coming full circle because that community, Chris, what, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, just kind of unwound. And we're here to explore that journey, that story, like that what happened, right?
Yeah.
But to give everybody some context perspective, like the way I had met Chris years, like talked to him years ago, was somebody had told me about this guy that was living in Tulum but was running this investment wholesale business like out of Tulum. And I remember listening to a podcast and admiring his thought process and his thinking around it. Um, then he was introduced to me by another friend. I think it might have been Chris Craddock. And I got to learn more about his journey. And I interviewed him on episode number one, so you can hear that, what that was all about. And then I got to really get to know him and know his heart in Tulum and other masterminds that we did throughout the country. Um, and um, and then I got a call one day that was essentially saying like, "Hey, this community that you like love, Rob, is getting shut down, and this is what happened, and this is what happened with Chris." And it's a little bit of the story of the entrepreneur, and like I'd love to unpack that a little bit, Chris. And I'll start anywhere. I'll take your direction, brother, on where you want to kind of start to have that conversation, and we'll just kind of go from there. Fair enough?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, my unraveling began with a lie. I had cheated on my wife, and for the first time in my life, harbored a lie at that level. Obviously, coming from a place of fear, particularly from a leadership position. If people find these things out about me, then I'll be rejected, which goes to the heart of a lot of our trauma, which we're going to talk a lot about today, and what is driving us to hide particular things, behave particular ways, and particularly for us as high achieving entrepreneurs to push ourselves to the extent that we do in the name of achievement, in the name of goals.
Mm,
And so, as I had that lie in my life, I could just start over time as I suppressed and ignored everything that was coming up by holding on to a secret like that. It began to shift me inside. And fast forward some years ahead, I was on the brink of like everything coming together at the same time to be just a full like wheels off on my bus.
hmm
Had finalized going through a divorce, which was really difficult. Had bought a company all at the same time, and now I'm running this brand new company going through a divorce. And like I was literally robbed to the point of like 19 years of running companies, the ups and downs, like there's nothing left in the tank. Like
hmm
I'm done. There's nothing more. I've ignored my body and my energy for so long. And so fast forward, the divorce is finalized. It's 19 years of running businesses. I'm worn out, and now I'm hit with the biggest business challenge I've ever had. The company that I purchased, I'm going to have to prematurely sell, and I'm going to take a significant loss. And bigger than that, because I'm so wrapped up in people's perception of me and likability, this is going to be a public failure, and people are going to know about it, and I'm embarrassed and I'm ashamed. Again, it's going back into this trauma in my life, right? I am getting ultimately triggered here. So the week of the sale of the company coincided with us going down to Honduras in this brotherhood that you were speaking of. It's called Multipliers. And we were doing a philanthropic trip. And it just so happened like I'm dealing with the sale of this company and having to do it while being in Honduras at the same time. I didn't want those two things to coincide, but I have a team that's crying because it's getting broken up, and single moms on the phone crying about how they're going to take care of their kids. And it's just all coming out, right?
Hmm.
And I have
Hmm.
nothing left, and I'm carrying the burden of all this because, I'm owning it. I'm the leader. I'm the one that's responsible. And so I started having anxiety attacks for the first time in my life. And the anxiety attacks were so bad that in Honduras, we needed to do something about it because obviously, like, my body was shaking and I couldn't sit still. And so we ended up getting some Xanax. And unfortunately, taking that Xanax, I had a very adverse effect to it. And within 48 hours, I went into onset depression. And after that, everything just went out of control. And so part of the story is a story about benzodiazepines. And so when I say benzos or benzodiazepines, I'm referring to the family of Xanax, Valium, Klonopin, or Ativan. So I'm sure people have seen or heard of those. And so taking that benzos, we'll use that for this podcast rather than saying Xanax. I was on a roof and about 4 days into taking the pills, and I went into what are referred to as benzos hallucinations. I'd never experienced anything like this in my life, but what I thought was happening was actually a vision from God. And three things happened on that roof that day. Number one, what I heard was there's absolutely no way out of the situation that you're in. Your life is over, like game over. And this is what benzos do. They exacerbate everything. The second thing was, Chris, you're an absolute piece of shit. You're a fraud. Everything in your life has been done out of ill will. And literally, I could see my life playing out before me. And it's just like there was this self-hatred and condemnation that set in. Now, I have a theological background, so this is going into the God bucket. It's not going into my understanding that benzos does this to people. And so at that point, I think like God is revealing my sin to me, right? And then lastly, for the first time in my life, at this point I was 42, 43 years old, I started having massive suicidal ideations. And what I heard on that roof was crystal clear as day, and I've never experienced this in my life. Chris, when you go back to the hotel tonight, you're going to take all of those benzos, the couple boxes of Xanax that you have, the benzos, take them all, get into a pool and kill yourself. And Rob is like marching orders, and I did it. And the next day, I woke up in a Honduras hospital. And fortunately, my brothers, a part of this brotherhood, the one that you're a part of as well, heard me thrashing around in the middle of the night and got into the pool and saved me. But you can imagine how traumatic this was for myself, for everyone that was involved. And so at that point, it's like, what do you do? In this particular situation, all I know is when I made that decision, I thought it was solely me that made it. And so when I woke up in that bed, Rob, the amount of shame and guilt I had because I didn't understand why I made the decision that I made. And so fast forward, my body is not functioning properly. We don't know what's wrong with me as I go back to the States and I'm under the care of my family. I can't formulate sentences. And so at this point, we don't know if I have brain damage because I was underwater for too long, or this was happening because of the amount of prescription drugs. But basically what ended up, the thinking was like, Chris had a mental breakdown. Like he snapped, which is understandable because that's what it looked like happened. And so what do you do? In Western culture, we do what we do best, and sometimes it's the right answer, but sometimes it's not, and that is you send you off to doctors. And I got shipped off to a rehabilitation center, one of these very like high-end that you see on TV. And what I'm going to speak of is my experience, because everyone's experience in these centers are going to be very different, so I can only speak from what I went through being in there. And so when I arrived there, I was not functioning and my body was convulsing and I couldn't formulate sentences. And they sent me in within 24 hours to see a psychiatrist. And they asked me what was wrong. I said, I don't know what's wrong. That's why I'm here. And within about 20 to 30 minutes, I walked out on 5 prescription drugs: lithium, Prozac, baclofen, antipsychotics, the works. And I'd never taken prescription drugs in my life. So now, Rob, things are getting really confusing. We have a lot of variables that are working, like what is going on here? And so what ends up happening and where things really went awry is the one prescription that they didn't continue me on was the benzodiazepine. So I continue or start to go into benzos withdrawals. And that's going to culminate over time. Let me put it into perspective. Like, Rob, benzos withdrawals are worse than heroin withdrawals. They are one of the worst experiences that you can have from any type of prescription drug. And what also can happen is you can go into more benzos hallucinations. And so my story in the center culminates with me going into a 2-week hallucination that the FBI was after me, that I was going to prison for the rest of my life, that I was part of a sting operation, and everything I was doing was being filmed. And literally you guys were turning on the news as this was being broadcasted to the world and telling each other to watch that Chris is part of a sting operation. Now, mind you, I've never had any mental health issues in my life, never taken any prescription drugs, but this is how radical this got. It got completely out of control, and this can sometimes occur with people taking different types of prescription drugs. So I know that there's people listening right now that might be on SSRIs or different things along those lines. And so part of my story is to be able to share that, sometimes this does not go well. And so in that process, I was able to come out of the hallucination because luckily I had a therapist who came in one day and wrapped her arms around me and stopped being a doctor. And she started crying and she whispered in my ear and hugged me like a mother. And she said, "Chris, we're not after you. We're here to help you." And basically it was like, if you ever seen The Sixth Sense with Bruce Willis, basically like getting to the end of the movie and realizing, Bruce Willis is dead. And basically she literally provided a key for me to unlock that everything I experienced over the last 2 weeks was not real. And that's a scary, scary thing to realize. So I talked my way out of there. I manipulated my way out of there. I wanted to be out of there, that situation. And so they sent me home, and when they sent me home, while I was in that particular facility, they had put me on a very strong benzos for a short amount of time called Ativan, which is about 10 times stronger. And so they took me off of that and sent me home, and unfortunately, they didn't really describe to my family what was about to happen next. And when I got home, I was actually withdrawing off some Ativan, which is way worse than Xanax, and now my family doesn't know what to do. Because I'm on the floor screaming in the fetal position. I literally thought that my brain was going to hemorrhage and that I was going to die. And you can go into seizures and you can die. So what do you do? Like, I have a huge group of people helping me. I have a lot of people that love and care for me in my life, and we have a lot of resources, but like, I don't know, my family, no one knows what to do. What do you do in this situation, right? He just came back from a center that was supposed to help him to become better, and now he's even worse. So at this point, we're under the belief I had a mental breakdown, and so the thought was send Chris to another center, which makes a lot of sense, but there was no way. I was going to go back into another facility where basically I'm on psych watch and people are following me around, writing everything I'm doing down every 15 minutes. They're in your room at night while you sleep, writing everything down. So it's not the place you want to be when you feel like you're in heroin withdrawals. It's terrible. So there's no way you weren't going to put me back into another home. So I decided to come back to Tulum, Mexico, where I live, and to try to figure out how to begin to heal myself, because I wasn't going to go back to another rehabilitation center and no one knew what to do. And so I came back to Tulum, and the first thing I did was I worked with a naturopathic doctor, and we were able to get me off a lot of the prescription drugs, but I could not get off of the Xanax. And at this point, my body is in so much pain. Basically, I'm losing weight. I develop agoraphobia, so I have a fear of leaving my house, which is another side effect of benzos. And my organs and bodies are starting to shut down, like I'm emaciated because I'm not eating, I'm not well, and I start tinkering with anything I can to try to relieve the pain. And basically, I create this cocktail that kind of gives me some relief for periods of time, and then I go back into a benzos withdrawal, but I don't know what to do to fix the situation. So the way that this culminates is this goes on for 7 months. And basically what it felt like I was being tortured alive for 7 months. But the worst part of it was I did not understand that this was a side effect of a prescription drug. I thought I was permanently disabled, that I was mentally handicapped for the rest of my life. And I believe that for 110% of my being. And so I had
Hmm.
literally bought a gun with bullets, kept it in my house, and my deal was I was going to get as much life as I could out of what I could. And biologically, when I was done being able to handle that level of pain for that long, I would end my life. And during that period of time, I reached out to someone that I trusted to take care of me, who was a medicine woman and had a large background in different types of plant medicine. And she dropped her life and she took care of me for about 3.5 months every single day. I was like a child. I was like 5 years old. I couldn't function. As I said, I couldn't leave the house. I couldn't, because what happens with benzos is when you get off, they take over the firing of your neurotransmitters. So literally, your brain is not functioning. And so, about the 7 month period, she sat me down and she said, Chris, I don't believe you had a mental breakdown. I don't believe that you're permanently disabled. Based on everything I know and researched, I believe that you're actually in a benzos withdrawal and I have the solution. And I said, what is the solution? And she says, if you microdose ayahuasca, which is a plant medicine out of Brazil or out of the Amazonian area, half a teaspoonful breakfast, lunch, and dinner, it will cure you. It will heal you. And I told her bullshit. There's no way. I've been to doctors. I've been to, like, no one knows what to do. But at this point, if I don't do it, she's going to walk out the door and I'm dead. And B, there's no other option on the table. And so I walk into that room, my bedroom here where we're recording it, and I stopped taking any of the remaining prescription drugs, everything I was taking at that point. And for about 6 days, I went into the most god-awful experience of my life because my body was fully withdrawing off the benzos now because I'm not taking anything. And basically my body started contorting. I started disassociating and passing out because the pain levels were so high. And
Hmm.
on the 6th day, I passed out and I came to and I was lucid for about 90 minutes. And Rob, I remember thinking to myself, if I can be okay for 90 minutes, can I be okay for 3 hours? And from
Hmm.
day 7 to day 15, I was completely cured. Now, this wasn't magic. This was not a miracle. This has been done with lots and lots of people, particularly with a mentor that the girl who took care of me lives down in Costa Rica. But baby, what happened neurologically is that when I would try to get off the benzos, my brain would not pick back up the firing of the neurotransmitters. And so this particular ayahuasca acted as a mediator between the benzos and my brain. And over that 15-day period, it passed the baton back to my brain to function. And I remember scanning my body, and there was no depression, there was no anxiety, there was no psychosis, which is everything that they diagnosed me with those centers. And when doctors tell you you have those things, particularly, right, because we trust doctors and sometimes we should, but we should not give all of our authority over to them. But basically, I believe them that their diagnosis of me was correct, but those were all just side effects of benzos. But they diagnosed it as coming from me. And at that point, my world completely changed because I was given a second chance at life. And then I got to evaluate my story to understand, wow, what did I do in my world, in my belief system to get me to a point that I had so much anxiety that I needed to take a prescription drug? That's on me. Now, what happened when the prescription drug went in my mouth, that's outside of my control, but there's a lot of layers to the story, right? Because it's a story about benzodiazepines and big pharma. It's a story about plant medicine, but it's also a story about the entrepreneurial journey and what happens when we push ourselves so far. And my real learning in all of this is like the biggest interest of my story is how did I get to a place that I pushed myself to that level that I was having anxiety attacks?
Hmm. Hmm.
That catches you up to where we're at today.
Chris, thanks for sharing. I know, well, I know it's twofold. One, probably coming to terms with the story and then telling the story is difficult, but also therapeutic in the process, right? To be able to share and tell the story. I'm glad you're able to tell the story. Um, and let's unpack the last thing that you said. It's like that 19 years of executing and being an entrepreneur and pushing and achievement oriented and then experiencing panic attacks. Like if you were to go back and rewind, the clock, what would you do differently? Of course, we can't change, but I'm just saying, like, what could have prevented you from taking that Xanax? Like, what could the entrepreneur do to not fall so out of balance that they get to the point where they're like experiencing the panic attacks. And the reason why I ask is because I have people in my world that I know that I love that are in our business that have a, have experienced that. And so
Yeah.
part of this is me helping me learn how I can help them in that process.
Or anyone that's listening, because everyone is
Yeah.
driving themselves to unhealthy levels. So I can tell you exactly what it is because we're going to bring something today for most people that's unconscious to a conscious level. And this is the one thing that I didn't understand that changed everything for me. So let me give you an overview of anyone that's listening right now, what's happening in just about everyone's life. There's no one that's not experiencing this. We all have these behaviors in our life right now that we're not proud of. Doesn't matter what it is. For some people, it might be drinking. For some, it might be porn. For some, it might be workaholism. For some, it might be doing very adventurous, extreme sport things. For some people, it's eating. It doesn't matter what it is. All of these behaviors are existing in our life. There's not very many people I know that do not have these particular vices or things that are happening. So what I will say is the first question that we have to ask, and I love it because Dr. Gabor Mate says it, the question is not why the behavior, but why the pain. And we live in a culture in which there's a lot of judgment around these types of behaviors. And we look at the behavior not understanding that why would we judge people for wanting relief from pain? Because that's why these behaviors exist, because there's pain in our lives. Now, what is underneath that pain, because for a lot of people, not understanding like why I don't feel right and why there's certain days like maybe I feel sad, or for men particularly, we tend to externalize pain. So that comes out as anger and comes out as rage, comes out as grandiosity, right? We know this, that men externalize pain. So we're having these feelings inside of us that we can't rectify, and we feel shameful and guiltful about them, particularly as entrepreneurs, because a lot of times it's like, man, I have my own business and I'm able to take care of my family, but like I'm still not like happy. Like what is wrong? And so what I'm going to tell you is underneath that pain is childhood wounds that have not been healed. And this is happening, you know, between usually the ages of 0 to 10. And it's going to happen either as we call whack or lack. So either there's some trauma that you can actually remember, whether you were in an abusive situation, whatever that looks like, or in your mind, hey, I had a pretty good upbringing, but it wasn't that you received something, it was the fact that you didn't receive something. But whatever it is in your life that happened that ended up being emotional neglect in those early childhood experiences gets interpreted into a very extreme belief in our life. And this is true for every human being that walks the face of the earth. If my mom or my dad, for whatever particular reasons, let's say they're workaholics, they're alcoholics, maybe mom deals with depression, maybe there's a divorce, maybe, you know, dad goes through some personal, whatever it is, whatever happens in their lives that causes us to experience neglect, rather than as a child understanding that my parents are going through their own issues that has nothing to do with me, we can't think that way as children. And so we personalize it and we come to this massive radical belief that mom and dad are not there for me because, and here it is, I'm not enough.
Mm,
I'm not
mm,
enough.
mm,
And we're all being driven by this deep sense of I'm not enough. And that could translate into any form of that sentence because we all have our own version of it. I'm inadequate. I'm incapable. All of it, however it comes out. But it's all rooted in that fundamental belief. So what that does for us, particularly as men, is that moves us into what's called performance-based self-esteem. So because I'm not enough, I therefore need to perform in order to feel better about myself. And so this is where you start to get these high achieving, driven entrepreneurs. Like, why are we pushing ourselves to such a level that we'll sacrifice our families, we'll sacrifice our health, we'll sacrifice anything in the name of continuing to grow our business? We'll work 12, 16 hours a day. Like, we're all doing this. Now, here's the thing. We all think it's normal because we're all friends. and we all spend time with each other, but it's not normal. You know what I'm saying? Like, we sit around like this is normal behavior to drive at the level that we do, but it's not. And so, what I'm going to tell you is I've realized is when you have a performance based self esteem, as your business goes and is doing well, you feel great about yourself. But the problem is when you're in an industry, particularly like real estate, and the market goes down, or things like COVID happen, or interest rates go up, and the business goes down, your self esteem goes down. So
Mm.
you're on a constant roller coaster in your life. And here's the ultimate thing: if I'm being driven from a sense of inadequacy or I'm not enough, a lot of times when I get to a place of being successful, I don't feel adequate for having that success. So therefore, I self sabotage and I end up blowing things up. And we see this with entrepreneurs all the time. Things are going great, start tinkering with shit, doing more shit, over leveraging, adding stuff on. And then rather than keeping things simple, we fuck it all up. It goes back down. You see
Oh,
it all the time.
totally.
You're laughing because you
Yeah.
know it's so true.
Oh, I know it's true.
So
Yeah, of course. I see that behavior in me for sure.
all the
Right.
time. So what I'm going to tell you is if I'm looking at my life and you ask me the key question, right? What would I wish I understood about myself back then that would have saved me to push myself to such a level that I needed to take a prescription drug? It was because I was being driven by this unconscious belief that I did not even know existed that was driving my entire life. And the majority of the decisions we make are unconscious. And the predominant unconscious belief that's driving it all is I'm not enough. I didn't know this. And it changed everything for me when I began to understand this. Because now I could begin the journey of healing myself. And here's the thing: anyone that's listening right now understands that they shouldn't draw their value from what they have and what they do and what people think. Hey, we all get that, right? But here's the problem, particularly for us as men. It's not that we don't know these things. The problem is we don't feel them. And here's the ultimate litmus test if you're listening right now to know whether or not you're freed from this. When you wake up every day, do you wake up feeling like you have something to prove to yourself, to your family, to your friends, hell, to people you don't even like? Do you wake up every day feeling like you have something to prove? If you do, it's stemming from an unconscious healed place of I'm not enough. Because we should wake up every day not feeling that way. Because we should be operating from a different operating system than fear and shame and guilt and inadequacy. But that's where most of us are functioning from, which is a very low vibrational frequency to function from. It will drive you to do insane things.
I have a question. Is there a way to, you know, some people could say like, hey, that's where hunger comes from, right? You've got these things that happened to you when you were younger. Parents didn't have money. Maybe there's money troubles in the house. Maybe there was like a divorce that like, so there's always like these, like in the building of a superhero, there's always like these things that happen, right? Like, hey, this thing happened, but it created this other superpower. And I believe that entrepreneurs, business owners have superpowers, right? But if you fly too close to the sun, Chris, like this is where you gotta people gotta learn about themselves. Then everything can get imploded, right? It's like that superpower actually ends up becoming the very kryptonite that got you there. Like what gets you here won't get you there, type of thing. Have you seen a different frequency where somebody can like, they want to be an achiever, they are driving, and yet there wasn't there's this they've discovered that balance in their life. Maybe they didn't like if I scan my life, like, and I'm being transparent, like if I scan my life, like, dude, I had an unbelievably good childhood. Like I moved a lot because my parents were in foreign service, but it was always like, but if I'm being honest, like I always wanted to excel since the day I was like what I think back of myself as a little kid, like I always wanted to win something, right? And maybe I wanted to prove my love to mom and dad. Like I don't know where that like I don't know where that came from, but I actually like that I have that thing. Like I don't see that. Like I like that I have that thing. And um but I also recognize that over the course of my life, I've pushed so hard that I've broken people that I love around me, and that the very thing that got me to where I was also damaging other areas of my life. And I had to learn how to pull back, act differently, learn about quality time, like learn all these other things, right? And luckily, it never took me. It took me to the precipice of certain things, right? But never took me over the edge of things. I don't know if I got a question there. I guess my question is there a way to actually have that hunger, right, without having it manifest back to some kind of childhood trauma, you know?
Absolutely. I think the deal is if I as a man go in and heal these core issues that have been driving me my entire life, is that going to end up making me a pussy and an underperformer? That's the real piece, right? Like I'm going to lose that edge that I have, right? And what I'm going to tell you is no, you have to come in and replace it because the reality is it will get you where you want to go a lot of times. But the problem is, and you've already said it, for most people listening, and this is true for particularly, let's look at the high achievers of the world that we read about and look up to, most of their personal lives are an absolute disaster. And really, what it's costing us at the end of the day is relationships because we're so hard hitting that we're emotionally shut down because we suppress and ignore the way that we feel and we just drive, and we drive. And so, what I'm going to say is that you've got to move from a low vibrational frequency of operating from shame and guilt and I'm not enough and start coming from a place of being healed and you move up to higher vibrational frequencies of love and passion and peace and joy and you can have massive drive out of something that you're passionate about and you can have massive performance around something that you love, but when it's coming from those places you're able to do it in a much more healthy way
Mm,
rather than I will sacrifice everything to no longer feel the shame that I feel. That I'm an I'll do anything not to feel like I'm an imposter when I walk into that mastermind room.
hmm.
Mm.
You know,
You see what I'm saying? That it's the trying to get rid of that feeling through performance, and you can't get rid of it by performing at a higher level. You can only heal it by getting in and actually healing it and feeling it, and then that allows you to function in an entirely different way.
it's interesting. If you enter into that mastermind, it's truly feeling like you're always just their learner, like you are really unbreakable. Um, you realize that there's always a bigger mountain, there's always a bigger fish, there's always like if you just come to the realization that like there's everything is levels, bro. Everything's levels, right? And that there's no winning the comparison game, right? The game is just you against you, right? Um, I think the entrepreneur can kind of turn like they can come to terms with that. Like I think a lot of the issues happen with that gap and gain conversation. Like I see him or her do that. Why am I not doing that? Like what is it about me that I'm not doing that? Like as soon as you can eliminate that and say it's me against me, can I be the best version of myself? And and by the way, can I help the person that was me 10 years ago on this journey? I think that's where a lot of the impact, what a lot of you and I are both community builders, right? We love people and community building. And a lot of times I'm like, yeah, I just want to help the Rob of 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, so that I can make that path a little bit easier. And not that not, and by the way, not that I want to take away the hard effort and work required, because in my opinion, that hard work and effort required is what self-worth, it's how self-worth is built, right? It goes back to that whole idea of like, I fundamentally feel really good about myself because of the work that I've put in, like over an extended period of time, right? Um, like I could be like, dude, and I think I a lot of that came from if I think about, dude, I was so sadomasochistic, like as a wrestler. Like you want to talk about somebody that was just like sacrifice body and
Hmm.
and health and everything for a sport that there's no glory, right? There's no big check at the end of that. except for the glory of wanting to like just prove to myself that I could do it. And I don't know if somebody would take me and put me on the couch and like peel back the onion far enough, and they're like, well, who were you trying to impress? Was it mom? Was it dad? Was what? Like, I could give two shits whether my mom and my dad were like at a wrestling match. Like it literally was from like pretty early age, like a battle of can I. But you know what? There's definitely an inkling of like I want to be seen as something, right? So I don't know what that was, right?
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I don't know. I guess everybody will have to kind of peel back their onion. Like everybody's got different experiences that of whatever that was that you had when you were younger that drove you to this competitive, achieving thing. But I do think that you as the entrepreneur, when the world, because you definitely had everything happen at the same time. Like everything happened, culminate at the same time. Um, if maybe you understood you a little bit more, and maybe that's part of the story is you understanding you and how you think, that would maybe prevent you from going to an outside force like you know, Xanax or something. Like again, dude, I'm not a therapist. I have no idea. I think about how meditation has helped for me, how knowing like how my body operates, like whether I gave up alcohol like 6 years ago because I realized alcohol made me feel um, tired, and I didn't like feeling tired. My identity was not of somebody that was tired, right? Or I remember when I was younger. Did you ever take Refuel when you were younger, Chris?
No, I know
You know
what you're
what
talking
Refuel?
about.
Refuel was like a almost like a dietary pill that you took before you worked out, right? And all my friends took Refuel. It was almost like, you know, I don't know, something that keeps you up. Like everybody did it. Like it stimulates you, right? But dude, when I took that one pill, it made me angry. I was like, wow, this pill, like I'm not an angry guy. That was one thing where I started realizing that like things can make me feel a certain way. Like that pill made me angry. And I didn't like feeling angry. Right? I was like, okay, I'm gonna stop taking that pill. Like it's not giving me the outcome that I want. Right? Um, so going back to the whole pharmaceutical conversation, right? How radically these things that we put in our bodies, whether it's alcohol, benzos, you know, uh, pot, like whatever it is, right? Whatever the stimulant is, just how radically they can alter your state. And so shit, I've never done ayahuasca. I've never done any like part of that scares me to be honest because it's a like not a natural thing. Like dude, I caffeine, coffee is like the most I take, right? So, but so many people I've talked to have gone on this spiritual journey with ayahuasca and have come out the other side and been like, dude, it's like the most amazing thing on the planet. Like I got to learn about myself, right? Um, and I'm curious why you believe it works. I'm almost wondering if there's other ways to be able to experience the same thing, but love to get your perspective.
I mean, basically, we're talking about that we as men have to take the longest journey that we have to take, and that's from our head to our hearts. And what I've come to realize is there's a lot of ways to go in. So there's a lot of different
Mm,
types of, we'll use the word, modalities, methodologies, therapies, some things
mm,
you ingest like plant medicine, but there's all types of stuff that's out there. For me and my understanding of the healing process and becoming, trauma informed through everything I went through, it doesn't matter what road you take as long as it allows you to go and basically heal the three disconnections that are existing in our lives. A, and these are the disconnections that are really messing us up. A, we have a disconnection from our parents because there's some type of unhealed situation that occurred there, whether that's conscious or unconscious. Number two, we're disconnected from ourselves because we as men have been taught that in order to be masculine, That needs to look a particular way, so we're not to, express motion. Feelings don't serve any value. So basically, we become robotic. We try to become as emotionless as possible. And anyone that's been around long enough and had kids and is married, or is even a leader in an organization leading people, that ain't gonna work for long. You can't be an emotionless person and be the type of person that you need to be in those roles. And so there's a disconnection from ourselves because we don't want to feel this pain that we have in our life. This is why predominantly we're doing everything we can to ignore and suppress and numb whatever it is that we're feeling. And because of that, we need to heal the last connection, and that's the connection to other people. The number one problem with entrepreneurs and anyone listening is isolation plus stress. So why do we isolate? Because, as I just said, those disconnections exist. I have pain from my childhood. I'm disconnecting myself because I don't want to feel it, because I feel like it's going to get in the way of my performance and everything that I'm doing. So I don't want to take the time to heal. And because of this, I feel shameful about some of the shit that I have going in my life, or hiding in order to feel better about myself and to numb it. So therefore, I'm going to hide and not have any type of real relationship with other men. I have a drinking buddy and a golfing buddy, but no one knows what's going on in my world. Bro, the majority of people listening to this podcast as men are hiding. They're isolated, they're alone, and they're hiding. And that's not being said out of judgment. It makes complete sense. I mean, why we are the way that we are, it has a lot of nothing to do with choice, but what's happened to us, between 0 to 10. So there should be nothing but, compassionate inquiry for the behaviors in our life. But that's the reality of what's going on, particularly in the male entrepreneurial community.
I have a question for you. I've heard this quote and I vehemently disagree with it. And yet I hear it over and over again. And I hear this: leadership, or business ownership is a lonely thing. That you hear it in different, like, you hear it in
It's
different
lonely at
genre.
the top.
What's that?
Yeah. It's lonely at the top.
It's
We have
lonely at
all
the
of it.
top, like all these other things. And I remember 3 or 4 years ago, I remember like being like, dude, then you're doing it wrong. Because that's never been my experience. But then I saw a lot of people were like, oh yeah, it's lonely at the top, and like people don't understand, and like, and I was like, it's so fascinating. Like, um, I'd love to get your perspective on that idea.
It's lonely at the top, not because that's the way it's supposed to be, but that's the way that it's defaulted to because of what we're talking about. So no, it shouldn't be. Particularly at the top, we should be in a place where we feel we can be radically honest, that we can be open about the difficult things that we're struggling with, and particularly as men, have other men that we feel like we can confide in. So one of the biggest things that's missing in our life is community with other men. It's essential to be able to navigate everything that we have to as leaders and entrepreneurs. Community is so important.
Yeah. I remember, I think maybe just a blessing that I had. Like, my best friend is still my best friend from like when since we were like 13 or 14, right? And and then one of my early business partners, like, also super close. We've been in business together 14 years now, right? Like, I've seen his babies grow. He knows all about my warts. I know all about his warts. Like, same thing with my best friend, right? Like, all these things. Um, and maybe I just kind of always took for granted the fact that I had these real relationships. By the way, Chris, it was one of the things when I was interviewing with you for multipliers, and you were talking about this void, right? I remember being like, yeah, I've never experienced that void, but I am
No,
fast.
you're an anomaly.
Yeah,
You're not the avatar of what's actually existing. But
yeah,
this is why you're a community builder. Most
yeah.
people are not community builders. It comes natural for you to have relationships with other men. Most men struggle with this.
The interesting thing I'm going to say, I don't think I've ever said this out loud, right? But uh, yeah, I have a close handful of friends, right? This is going to sound funny. I have a close handful of guy friends, but um, I'm very good at making lots of girlfriends, right? Meaning, not that I have a lot, like my wife would hate me saying that, like, not that I have like a ton of girlfriends that are out there, right? But meaning, if I was in a conversation and I had the option of talking to guys or talking to girls, I can relate so much more to the female conversation than to the male testosterone filled conversation, right? I don't know what that is. It's just like I've noticed that about myself, right? I've never experienced that, like I never went down that rabbit hole of like that. Even though like I'm like wrestled Division One, I was always different than everybody on my wrestling team. Dated the same girl through college for 7 years. Literally, I was like this little isolated bubble with her, um, and and I have all these guy friends that were on the wrestling team, but like they did stupid ass stuff, right? As wrestlers, and I was like, dude, I've got a serious relationship. I got I'm working towards a career and all that stuff. And so yeah, I always felt like I had a strong foundation of a couple of strong guy friends around me, but like I always associated and could have really strong conversations with women and just learn about them. And I don't know. You're putting me on the couch now, Chris. I don't know what that is, but like that is something I've noticed about myself over the years, right? Um, and I am a community builder. Like that is an important piece. Let's talk a little bit about that, right? You and I both are passionate about building community. What is it about, what is it for you? And I could tell you what it is for me, but I'm curious, what is it for you that's so important for you to build community? And I hear building community also with men that are experiencing the things that we experience, entrepreneurial men that kind of go through this. Because it's definitely like I see the challenges that we go through, right? But tell
Yeah.
me.
I believe that it's nearly impossible to get to clarity alone. And when we find ourselves in a community, we find ourselves amongst people that can be mirrors for us, that allow us to see each other for who we really are. And when it comes to personal development, which I'm all about, whether you hire coaches or work with, a therapist, et cetera, I think it's valuable. But what we do is we kind of go in and out of transformation depending on whether or not during that season we're investing time into personal development. When you put yourself into community, like you can't hide.
Hmm.
Like it creates a rhythm and it creates an interaction to continue to grow you and challenge you on a
Hmm.
regular basis. And I believe that people change people the most, more than anything. If you listen to anyone's story in their life or their biography, the most pivotal changes in their life and that story are going to come through meeting particular people at particular times throughout their journey. And so community allows us to come together and create an evolving sense of development and growth, a place in which we can't hide, a place in which we're challenged and we really see ourselves, because when we're alone, we can self-deceive, but we can't self-deceive, a group of people. They're all giving us the same feedback. So we're meant to be in community as humans. It's the way we develop. It's in the DNA. We're
Yeah.
not meant to be alone. That is not the way that our minds and our emotions and our bodies are built. We're not meant to isolate.
Yeah, I always say like one conversation, one relationship, one idea, one word of encouragement, um, can change the trajectory of somebody's life. Like that's part of the community. On the counter side of that, you know, you think about as kids develop, because we're talking about like kids going from the age of 1 to 10, right, or 1 to 15, like words can crush young people at an early age, right? Somebody says, you're not good for anything, you're not good enough. Why do you get, um, you know, hopefully communities that are built are communities that uplift people. And I think that's one of the things that's always been important to me. I remember writing down years ago, I was like, what am I? Like, who am I? Right? Like, what do I want to, like, there's all these things, right? But I was like, man, I just want to be a shining light. Like if I just kind of come down to it, it's like, can I just be a spotlight in a dark place? Can my flame be so bright that it just might give a little bit of light to somebody that's going through some darkness? That always resonated with me, right? There's a lot of things I wanted to achieve, but I was like, if I could just be in my community that, um, then I am enough, right? Then it's just like, let me just be a positive drum beat in a, consistent positive drum beat. And I think we've done that in our community over the years. Right? I think I've done that with like a lot of my partners that have been with me 15 plus years. I'm starting to look back and being like, dude, I'm the old guy in the room now, which is crazy. I'm still young, feel young. I'm saying I'm young, right? Um, but it's those things like Tom Bill you say, it's those things that we say to ourselves when we're by ourselves that like matter. What are the things that you say to yourself when you wake up in the morning? I was telling my team this the other day. I've said something for so long every single morning, and I probably said it in the beginning when I was like tired and exhausted and scared and like, but it's just so ingrained now that I'm just like, I make miracles happen, right? I make great things happen. Like literally, like I wake up and like that's the thing. And when I'm tired, I'm like, or especially when I'm tired, I say that, and it's just like this habit. And I think about all the negative things too, as people are like kind of building this thing that people might say to themselves that like weaken them, weaken the soul, right? Um, I don't know if you want to explore that at all. And the reason why I bring that up is because Chris, like I've over the last ever since COVID happened, I have definitely seen people within my organization struggle with mental health. Like I can identify a lot with the story that you're telling us, because I've seen it unfold within people within my organization. Like people that I like love, respect, are incredibly intelligent, like they're amazing. And but they're pushing so hard and there isn't like a valve to get released somewhere. So the valve, I don't know what freaking valve it is, but it then leads to like super bad consequences.
Of course, it's trapped emotions in the body. So you have to understand what's happening if we're looking from an overall health perspective, right? So we know that the majority of chronic illnesses, 80% of those come chronic stress. And what is chronic stress? Stress is an energy that is stored within the body that is not released, right?
Mm,
When we have emotions, emotions are energy. And if we have stuff that we've not dealt with, it gets trapped in the body. And it can get trapped in different parts of the body. A lot of times, negative emotions go and trap into the weaker parts of the body that are already susceptible to being sick based on just our DNA and the way that we're born. So what ends up happening is if you're looking at like depression and anxiety and chronic illnesses, whether it be autoimmune disorder or chronic fatigue syndrome, it doesn't matter what it is. You have to understand the manifestation of all of that is this trapped energy that's in our body. It's making us sick because what's happening is when we experience something like sadness, depression, anxiety, we view that like as a bad thing. But that's just the body trying to get your attention that you're
mm,
not well
mm,
mentally and emotionally. The body will speak to you and then it will scream at you. So we live in a society when we have depression or anxiety or whatever, we go to a doctor and under Western medicine, rather these are just symptoms of a root issue. This is what this whole thing is about. Because you're talking about, well, if I heal these things in my life and these things that are driving me have helped me achieve, but they're making us sick
mm, mm-hmm,
physically, mentally, emotionally. And so when we go to the doctor, what rather than dealing with the root cause, what they do is put us on prescription drugs
yeah.
to again numb it, suppress, and ignore, which is what we've been doing this whole time with all this. Is why people are as sick as we are, particularly within American culture. So you're absolutely right. The journey to go in to get well, if we're talking about healing, right? Stored emotions in the body, call it trauma, call it wounds. I don't care what you want to call it, but it's stored energy in the body. That energy's got to be released. It's got to get out of the body in order to be well. And you know it's in there because you feel it.
Mm-hmm.
You can feel it, whether it
Mm-hmm.
sits for some people in anxiety in their sternum, or
Mm-hmm.
something that sits in their belly and they feel it, or it translates into like a headache or whatever. You can
Mm.
feel it in your body. And that's the body speaking like you're not well. And this is the whole process. Like if you're asking me if I knew anything about this whole process and everything that we're communicating in my story, this is all originating predominantly from childhood. And then we put on this lifestyle as entrepreneurs where we work as hard as we have. And when we combine a driven lifestyle as an entrepreneur, the stress that that creates from the environment, so environmental stress with internal stress of just not dealing with any of our shit, it's a ticking time bomb.
Mm. Chris, actually, it's interesting.
Around with the health of people in general. It's not, I mean, I don't mean to be convincing here. Look at the health of
No,
people
no,
in general.
dude, I 100%, I identify and I fully hear you. Something that you said, the longest journey, I want to make sure I get this right, um, is between your heart and your mind, or your mind and your heart. Is that what you said?
So the longest journey a man has to take is from his head to his heart.
From his head to his heart.
Because for men, it's all disconnection from feeling.
You know, it's
We,
in,
we
it's so,
again, if I'm ignoring my body and ignoring my feelings, then I'm ignoring my health, basically, at the end of the day, because that's my body's way of telling me that I'm not healthy. Tracking?
yeah, the other thing you said, and I really like this, because it connects the dots for me a lot, is there's multiple ways to hack the system, right? Maybe it's ayahuasca. I watched an episode the other day that was like on fasting, like these two twin brothers from Australia. It was like on Netflix, like they did like this long fast, right? Maybe it's yoga, like I something you need to hack the system. There was something that I experienced. I was open, like I remember talking to my team about this, that I developed this maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, and maybe I even shared it with you at some point. But like my hands would sweat. I was like, what is it? As soon as I picked up my phone, like my phone was like a trigger. And it was like a stress trigger, man. Like literally my hands would sweat. And I was like, what is this? And I didn't feel sick. I didn't feel anything. But I'm like, that's not healthy. My system must be on overdrive. And and I remember being like, this is some kind of weakness that I've manifested as I've gotten old. Like that's how I viewed it. I'm like, what is this weakness that I've got? Right. And I remember I just said, I should probably just start getting serious about taking yoga. And man, I just started being consistent with taking yoga at the end of the day. Um, and like it went away. It freaking went away, right? Um, it was my body needing some kind of release, like you said. And the way that I think I hacked it was this combination of heavy breathing and sweating, right? This combination of heavy breathing and sweating. And like I just remember like at the end of a yoga class, I'm like, I'm buzzing. Like as if I've taken like the best drugs in my like ever. And I'm like, this feels so good. And I just like I don't know if you've ever practiced yoga, Chris, or not, and whether you've had that experience, but I, for those that might be looking for an additional way to hack the system, I'm like a big fan.
Yeah, anything that's somatic. Somatic means of the body. Anything that's somatic that allows you to release energy from the body. Breathing is one of those things.
Mhm.
Stretching is one of those things. Yoga is one of those things. Cold therapy. There's hundreds of things. They're
So
all valuable.
So, what have you on this journey? Because all of our bodies are different, right? What are the things, the right cocktail mix, the right calendar schedule mix, the right cold plunge, or for you, right? Like, what have you discovered on this journey that puts you in the optimal state that you want to be in, which I would imagine is some form of peace? I always talk about this, like, this push and peace that needs to occur in our lives, right? It's this balance between push and peace. Push too much, shit breaks. Hang out too much in a peaceful state, nothing happens, right? I'm like push and peace. Like, what has been that optimal thing for you? What have you
Yeah.
discovered?
Yeah, so for me, it's not about having a particular formula of doing things a particular way each time, each day, because that was my old thinking, right? And there's nothing wrong with like having a morning routine, investing into particular things. Some might say, hey, it's meditation for me. Others might say it's going and doing the cold plunge, sauna, hot, cold mix, etc. That's not really been predominantly where my pieces come from. Those things are healthy on a day-to-day basis, but the piece was getting in and doing the real work of releasing and dealing with the real pain that I had in my life. That's what led to the actual greater sense
Mm,
of peace.
hmm
Those things that we're talking about support peace, that they support and help in the healing journey, but there's deeper work that has to be done in the sense of really healing what's going on internally in our lives,
Can I ask you
which is what.
can I ask you a question, Chris? Would you say
Mhm.
that the ultimate journey of healing, if it was to get summed up, is forgiveness?
I think forgiveness is a piece of it. I think as much as it's forgiveness, I'll layer on that it's acceptance.
Mm,
Because again, it is
mm,
forgiveness, acceptance. If at the end of the day, I have to go in and I have to accept the childhood that I had and what I was given by my parents, but I also have to forgive them, but accept the fact that they did the best that they could based on what they were given by their grandparents and
hmm
by that generation that came before them. So
hmm
from that standpoint, it's about forgiveness, acceptance. Then I have to look at myself and the decisions that I've made in my life and understand, yeah, I have responsibility for those things, but also I'm a product of environment. And I have to accept like what I've done and mistakes that I've made and forgive myself. But again, these are the reconnections, right? And then also, yeah, I have to accept and forgive what I've done in the relationships that are around me because of that. But do you realize this is just one generation doing the next thing, and this it's just an ongoing sense of like repetitious chaos generationally.
hmm
This is why one generation's alcoholics and then the next one is, and the next one in, or one has depression and the next one does, or anxiety or suicide. Like, let me give you a prime example of mine. My grandfather committed suicide. My mom committed suicide. I had a suicide attempt. Do you think that's coincidence? No.
hmm
This is
hmm
undealt with generational trauma.
mm mm
And so for me, it's like, it's enough is enough.
hmm
It's like it's got to get in, and luckily, with this day and age and the resources I have, I can get in and do the work so that this doesn't continue. Because if I don't heal it, then it's going to pop up the next generation.
hmm
It's the same with disease. It's all being passed down because it's not being dealt with. So again, we're all going back to the core of, yeah, it's acceptance and forgiveness, but it's in those areas that we talked about
hmm
because that's what's messing everything
So
up.
where does all this lead you next, Chris?
Uh, I mean, I think that's the most beautiful part of this story. This is a story about plant medicine and big pharma and leadership, right, and entrepreneurism and trauma. But the best part of the story is that this came full circle to be a story about brotherhood and the brotherhood that I had to shut down because for 7 months I was basically incapacitated. And I needed to go through my own healing journey because basically the brother I was running was focused on men's work, focused on high achieving entrepreneurial men, helping them create the lives they want inside and out. But I wasn't understanding really the scope of the work. Providing an environment for men to be vulnerable, very important. It's the first step. But what happens when men are vulnerable and they start to lay all the stuff out on the table of what's really going on? How do we actually heal this stuff? Because there's a lot of pain and most people listening are hurting and know people that are hurting. So this has led full circle to me being able to come back and do the one thing I was always called to do, and that's to run a brotherhood for high achieving entrepreneurs. And so I was able to relaunch that, and rather than being called multipliers, it's now called simplifiers, which I think
I love
is
it.
it all. It's the whole story in all of this. Because what happens is when I get to a place of healing, then I can begin to simplify my life. Because here's the deal,
Mm,
If I believe that I'm not enough, then I can never answer the question, how much money is enough? How many deals are enough? How much rental properties in my portfolio is
Hmm.
enough? Nothing is ever enough if I don't feel like I'm enough. And so this is why people just keep driving forever.
Hmm.
There's no stopping, there's no simplifying, and we got into all of this in hopes of having the freedom that we could pour into the things in our life that matter, like our kids and to travel and all the stories we have told ourselves. And we are all in this when then trap of when this happens, then I'm going to do these things.
Hmm.
But the reality is, most of the people I know are not doing any of that shit. And we fully convinced ourselves that we're doing all of this for our families, but it's all bullshit. We're doing it because we don't feel well and we're trying to prove ourselves through our performance. And because we don't feel like enough, we can't stop and we just keep pushing and pushing.
Hmm.
It never ends. It never ends. And there's got to be a point of beginning to answer those questions so I can begin to really build out a life of parameters and boundaries of what it should look like to simplify. Because I believe, and I love the quote by Einstein, I think he nails it, there's 5 ascending levels of intellect. There's smart, intelligent, brilliant, genius, and simple. And what I began to realize in all of this is that the true thing that I needed to understand about my life was I needed to learn how to simplify,
Hmm.
to say no, to not jump on every shiny object, the ability to focus,
Hmm.
to not over leverage. All the shit we know we're supposed to be doing, but none of us do.
Hmm.
It's not like any of this is surprising. The problem is we just behavior is like, why is no one actually doing this?
Hmm.
So absolutely, it's been about simplifying, and now it's about building a brotherhood of men who want to achieve incredible things. Like we're very driven by nature, but it's different to be a part of a community that's being driven by passion and peace and love, and is doing it in a way to build a life that is healthy and serves it. It's doing. Here's my deal. It's going about the entrepreneurial game in life in a different way because the way that most people are doing is making us sick. Our culture is sick.
Are you
Entrepreneurial men by nature are pretty sick.
are you friends with Brad Chandler by any chance? Do you know Brad Chandler?
Yeah, no, Brad was on Brad's podcast. Talk to Brad all the time. We completely agree on the dynamic of this. This
Oh
is pretty
yeah,
cool.
I'm like I don't know fully all of Brad's story, but I know that like not like I know yours, but I know there's lots of similar themes and elements throughout the story, right? You talk about just like a high driver achiever in this area who literally like now it's like, dude, it's all love. It's all about love. Right? He's like the love coach, and I love it. It reminds me of the story of the fisherman and the consultant. I'm sure you heard that story of the fisherman
Yeah,
and the consultant,
yeah,
right? And for those that haven't heard, I'm going to butcher it, but I'll go really fast. Where like, there's a gentleman like on the beach, and he goes fishing in the morning, and he brings home catch for his family, and he's at home by noon, and he plays his guitar, and he hangs out with his children, and he, you know, hugs his wife, and he loves his family, and he's got this just like unbelievable life, right? And the consultant sees him and sees that he catches all this fish, and he's like, sir, I see that like if you actually just applied yourself, you could actually like take tourists out, and like I'm butchering the story, but the idea is like you could go out and like you could get one boat and you could catch all these fish and make all this money, and then you could he's like, okay, well what then? He's like, well then you could get like a fleet of boats, and he's like, okay, then what then? He's like, well then you'd have an empire, and he's like, wonderful, what then? He's like, well then you get to sell it and you make all this money. He's like, what then? He's like, well you retire in a little island, where you get to fish in the morning and come hang out with your family in the afternoon and play guitar and make love to your wife, and just he's like, yeah, I'm already there, right? Everything I want is already there, right? Um, so go listen to that story because I just freaking butchered it. But the idea is, we're all chasing this thing, and at the end of the day, I've always said, once you understand it's the little things in life, like that cup of coffee, like that for me, it's that warm cup of coffee in the morning with somebody that I love, like overlooking like a scenic place, like I'm good, like hey, life is good, right? The peace part. Um, and so I was going to connect you with Brad if you didn't know Brad, but it sounds like you guys already know each other, right? If somebody wants to know more about simplifiers, Chris, where do they go?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say two things. One, if you've heard the story, and I know for some people listening, we've really kind of read your mail on what's happening in your life, and you might feel isolated and alone and stuck, and like I don't even know where to begin by having a conversation because I don't know who would understand what I'm feeling or experiencing. I want those people to know that they've got a place to reach out to. And so you can go to our website for either that first reason, simplifiersbrotherhood.com. Again, that's simplifiersbrotherhood.com. Just fill out a simple web form and let us know what it is that you need and you're struggling with because we want to provide support around that. And number two, if what we're talking about interests you in the sense of wanting to be in a community of men who are authentic and transparent and really coming in not just to build a business, because that's a huge part of it, right? To continue to build these businesses the way we want, but to go about it in a healthy way and to be around men in which we can actually do the real work of becoming the best fathers, husbands, and leaders we can be. And this is the type of community of men that we have, men that want to get it right.
Yeah.
Not a pissing contest, right?
Yeah.
Not a chest beating.
Not a testosterone contest.
Yeah,
Again, I
just
go back to that whole idea of this balance between peace and push, right? Maybe one day I'll write a book that's called Peace and Push. But there is that balance between those two, and ultimately it's just a journey, right? Of everybody's got to find the thing, that right balance for them, right? It's going to be unique to everybody. Um, but Chris, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I promised you it was only going to be 45 minutes to an hour, and here we are. It's an hour and 11 minutes, right? But it was a good story and good conversation. And I know I know this conversation has spoken deeply to somebody, and I would just encourage you to um, call Chris, get in connection with Chris, right? Talk to him, and and Chris, I appreciate you, man. Thank you for um,
I
yeah,
appreciate it.
being a part of my life. I appreciate it.